In today's episode, you're going to learn what it takes to build a fintech company from scratch, one that opens up an entire asset class to the public, all while staying grounded to your personal values. In this episode of The Conscious Entrepreneur, I sit down with Brian Daly, the co-founder and CEO of Groundfloor. Brian shares the path that led him from launching a really successful company, which was Republic Wireless, to creating Groundfloor, one of the first platforms that makes real estate debt accessible to everyday investors. Brian talks about the painful cost of being too early in launching his business, how to know if your ambition is matching the price you're paying as being an entrepreneur, and what happens when the culture inside your company breaks down and you have to take responsibility for it. He also shares his personal journey, one that changed how he leads and how he sees the business. He also talks about how he finds energy and motivation after 12 plus years working in this business and the practices that keep him mentally, physically, and emotionally fit. You know, this is a great conversation because it ties directly into the themes of the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit, which is coming up really soon, May 28th and 29th in Boulder, Colorado. And at the summit, we bring in highly experienced and inspiring CEOs, put them on stage to share their entrepreneurial journeys and their personal beliefs with us, just like in this conversation today. So if this episode speaks to you, if you like this kind of conversation, if you want to join the discussion, then come join us in the room at the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit in just a few weeks. All right, let's jump in with Brian Daly. Brian, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me on the Conscious Entrepreneur.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, you bet. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. You've had a very, very cool career. Recently, co-founder and CEO of Groundfloor Finance, super interesting company. Before that, you launched Republic Wireless. So someone who has obviously taken big bets, very ambitious, high impact in terms of your work as an entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about Groundfloor and how it links into helping people like thrive in their world and how it fits into a bigger mission for you.
Well, we were, like a lot of stories go in the entrepreneurial world, fortunately, we were right about something important. We were a little wrong about the timing, but we lived to tell the tale anyway. We have lived to tell the tale anyway. Back in 2012, I was looking for my next entrepreneurial pursuit. I had just finished at Republic Wireless, had a fantastic entrepreneurial experience there. Happy to talk about that as well because it factors in to my journey. But I was looking for the next thing. And I was very interested in finance. I had been an investor since age 15.
All right.
Kudos to my dad for getting me interested in that at a very young age and giving me all kinds of incentives to invest, which I highly recommend that we do with our kids. And I was looking for an idea. I had an idea about housing and the wealth we all have tied up in housing and how a financial product might be made of that. And fortunately for me, I was volunteering at a startup incubator. The director asked me about the idea I was working on. I drew it on a whiteboard and he said, I know just the guy you need to meet. And that guy became my co-founder.
Wow.
We found common cause. And I was introduced to him because he worked on Title III of the Jobs Act, which was signed by President Obama in 2012. He was in the Rose Garden when the act was signed. He was really part of it and is very insightful about this corner of securities law. And I was introduced to him because I needed somebody like that to make my idea a reality. And Nick and I started collaborating 13 years ago and are still at it. We're still on the same mission, which is to bring private market investments to everybody in the same way that stock trading was brought to everybody, starting with Charles Schwab and his discount brokers in the 70s. Mm-hmm. The same thing is happening in alternative investments. That world of private market investing, that's 25% of institutional or ultra high net worth portfolios, is currently only 5% of individual investor portfolios. And the same trend and the same causality that brought you Schwab and E-Trade and Robinhood and the meme stock phenomenon is coming to alternatives, but it needs a crop of companies like Groundfloor to make it happen. And that was our mission, was to open up the world of alternative investing to the mass market of retail investors. We were early, and as I said, we lived to tell the tale. At least we're still telling the tale.
So, what was the impact of being early?
Well, we had to suffer a lot of pain, and our early investors had to suffer a lot of pain because, we thought we saw where the market would go, and we thought that it would develop faster than it did, and everything from the regulatory foundation that was needed. When we first started, of course, 12 different securities lawyers told us we could never do what we were trying to get done with the SEC. We ultimately did it anyway. But when we did it, we were told that it might take 6 months. Like an ordinary offering would take 3 months. So this one might take 6 months. You might need a few $100,000 in capital. Ended up taking 5 years to get qualified nationwide, 4 or 5 years, and about $2 million. So it took a long time and a lot of money to sort of build the regulatory foundation. And so that was the cost of being early. But we paved the way, and I think we learned a lot in the process. I think going through the regulatory process made it a better product, and we humbled ourselves to that, and it really paid off because it built the right foundation for the company long-term, strategically and commercially.
Wow, very cool, very cool. And so this was also part of the same time there was the boom in like the angel investing and making VC available to the masses and all that sort of stuff. So tremendous amount of change really has been going on here. Right. And this is what you've been living through.
It is. And I'm glad we found our way to real estate. When we first started, we didn't know, neither of us were real estate guys. We weren't Wall Street guys, which I think played to our advantage because we started talking to individual investors about, if they were going to invest in something outside the public markets, what would it be? And it turns out 2/3 of the ideas we had on our whiteboard were real estate ideas. And within that, a bunch of them were residential, like single family housing. And it took us about a year to figure out what house flipping was and what the financing for that could be and how it would match up to what individual investors needed and wanted in an alternative product. But I'm glad we found our way to that. It didn't end up, in some of the more esoteric things that have also worked just at a lower level of scale.
And so to what extent did your previous work launching Republic Wireless feed into this? Because for a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, this sounds totally overwhelming, right? Like super complicated, regulatory, you got to put up a lot of capital, you got to engage lawyers, like big process.
Yeah.
And that would probably turn off a lot of entrepreneurs who think,
Sure.
There's too much here, too much startup cost, too much upfront. But you've kind of done all this before, right? So you were looking at this through a different set of eyes. Walk us back through those parts of your career.
Yeah, I started my first company during my first year of law school, much to my wife's chagrin. I'm a 1L.
Okay.
I'm going to class. I'm nominally studying or reading and then I'm writing code. Because I was interested in the internet, and it was 1996. I'm dating myself a little. And my business school professors, I was in law school and business school, my business school professors were all hot and bothered about the web, talking about different business models. And I wanted to do a project. And so that was my first experience, was building this website that was to buy and sell used case books. Paul Graham says, solve a problem that, build something people want, or something that law students wanted. It really worked. I got bit by it, by the bug. I wanted to do it again. And I worked on several projects, but when it came time to graduate, I had student loans that were equivalent to a mortgage, but no house, Right. So I went off to Silicon Valley to work for some public internet companies. And I worked in product management, which was entrepreneurial, but it's not being a founder. And I just knew I wanted to work my way to get to be a founder. And it took me some time. It took me probably a decade before I started Republic Wireless. I worked in successively earlier stage companies that were VC backed. And after a while, I was like, I think I can do this. If I just have the right idea, I think I can do it. So it took
did
me a
you feel
while.
did you feel like you were more looking for an idea versus because you'd already learned all the skills working for other people essentially?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I wasn't, I really knew I needed an idea that was big enough and that was, you know, linked to something inside me that I could really identify with. I wasn't just going to do it to do it, and so I think that's part of what took so much time. I was in the wireless industry, for a good solid 10 years. And then I had an opportunity to build Republic Wireless, and I took it and I loved it. And that was incredibly complex and challenging as well. A great story there. But when I got started to do ground floor, I felt I had a good enough grounding, in the basics, in what I needed to do, in product, in selling. I didn't really have a lot of fundraising experience. That was challenging because I
Okay.
was pretty new at that, and that was a new element. And then what I also realized that over the years, I really needed to grow as a leader.
Mm.
So I had the good fortune of leading teams and being a middle manager and a top exec in a startup, but being in this role really challenged me in so many ways over the years. I think that's one of my favorite things about it is how I've had to change and mature, as a leader, a manager, a person, really.
Right. So I mean, we often say that the entrepreneurship journey is really about growing as a person, right? It's your personal growth, and in many ways, the company is going to stall out if you don't keep growing, right?
Correct.
So the company's only going to grow as fast as you do.
I believe that.
What did you wind up? How did you wind up building your own personal leadership philosophy around this? Like, what became of that?
Well, I really thought I knew who I was as a leader when I started the company. And then I learned the hard way that I had a lot of development to do and a lot of reflection. It was very humbling.
Mm.
Um, I once you're once you're once you're vulnerable, not vulnerable in the way that you're admitting vulnerability, but you are actually vulnerable. I think if you really connect with that, you start to realize that you have to work on the internal skills and psychology. For me, it was a spiritual journey. Frankly, I'm a person of faith, but spent most of my life as an atheist before coming to Christ in 2009.
Okay.
And I started Groundfloor about 3 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I spent a lot of time on my knees in prayer, asking for help. And I didn't have that experience when I was just an exec at a company. I didn't feel it that deeply. I wasn't as hard pressed and cornered as I became in this role. And
Right.
whether it's appreciating, providence or coincidence, or if you don't believe in that, the universe aligning or something, you start to realize that there's only so much you can do. And then you need other people and other forces and good fortune around you in order to get where you're going. You can't do it yourself. And I learned the nasty lesson I would, that I learned early on. Nobody, I would say nobody gives a shit about your crappy little startup.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to hear, as an entrepreneur, but I felt it. And I turned that around and I learned to be very grateful for the people who did demonstrate they care. And it might be the customer who wants to yell at you and tell you why you guys are screwing it up and why why you're never going to be successful, or the community banker who put his arm around me in a bar one day and said, "You seem like a nice guy. Are you sure you want to do this? This is going to make your skin crawl." You start to realize there are people around you who are put in your path or who you intersect with that, have a lot to offer. And it became an awakening for me, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And I think that served me really well because it made me open and more grateful rather than feeling like I might have felt earlier. When I was a middle manager, I might have felt attacked, or I might have felt, some ego at risk. And I learned quickly that I had to lay that down if I was going to make progress.
Well, part of what I'll reflect back that I'm hearing is the idea that everyone is an ally. Like even the people who are saying no, even the things that look like obstacles, they're all helping you in some way or another to refine your idea, or to communicate it differently, or to find the inspiration inside yourself, or to find that extra like ounce of effort. But it sounds like you're changing your mind on that. You're saying, I'm no longer being attacked. These are all people who are somehow supporting me.
I do believe that spiritual warfare is a real thing. I believe that's, as a person of faith, I believe that's actually happening. And so I don't want to totally discount that there are forces. The biggest force against us is within ourselves. It's within ourselves telling us that we can't do it, or that this person is against me, or, feeling envy. For example, a lot of us feel envy about the startup in your space that raised this money, but you don't know that they're having raised that money was actually their undoing later. And we saw some examples of that. And so I do think that there are forces that are aligned against us, most of all within ourselves. And you got to be aware of that. And you got to know the difference. And I really think it's important to appreciate the people who come at you, because the enemy is ambivalence, right? The real enemy is people who just really don't care. Like you could live or die, and whatever. Those are the people who are going to suck your energy if you let them. And I think if they're cheering you on, that's great. But if they're coming at you and trying to criticize you, that's even more valuable. There's gold in that.
So then how did you then spin that into the company culture? Like, how does that now come alive within Groundfloor?
Well, I'll tell you, I was a real skeptic about the idea about company values. And, I understood the catechism of entrepreneurial faith that you got to have values, you got to be mission driven. Intellectually, I understood all of that. I thought it was a bunch of bullshit, though. I got to be honest. I really felt like it was an opportunity that was ripe for hypocrisy. And I think in a lot of environments it is, and that breeds cynicism, and who has time for that? So I really learned the hard way that culture matters and that values matter, because I was, I'll tell you a story. I was on vacation with my 8-year-old son. Actually, I guess he was 9. We were in Park City. It was about 9 a.m. local time, and we were waiting for the first chair of the day. But I was on a conference call on vacation, and our sales and ops teams were on this conference call screaming at each other. And it was out of control. There was out of control conflict. People were really behaving in a way that I just couldn't believe people in my company were behaving this way. And I had to take accountability for why this was happening and what my role was in it. And when I got back from vacation, we pulled together kind of 6 or 8 of us, sat in a conference room, and we started to hammer out who we are as a people, who we wanted to be. And the important thing we did that made it real for me is we vested that and built it in the foundation of what we were trying to do in our mission. Mm-hmm. And that made it very tangible and real for me, instead of just posters on a wall. That's where I became a convert to the idea of company values. And I think, we have 8 of them, which is a lot. And we have a very particular thought process around why there are 8 of them, how they work. I like to say they're not statutes, they're common law principles that we can and should argue about. I love that there are 8 that it's hard to memorize them. That's good. You actually have to look them up and figure out what they are and in order to apply them. But I think that was a seminal moment for us. And
how far into the business were you? What year was that?
Oh, that was, I think, 2016. So
about 3 years in?
Yeah, it was about 3 years in when we really hit the bottom, the rock bottom. And, there was employee litigation, and there were all these after effects of these cultural defects, that we had to live through. And it was humbling because, I was such a culture skeptic, that I really learned why it matters. But I had to figure that out for myself. I had to be humbled. I had to come to it in my own way. And I'm grateful for it, because in the end, I think we found a foundation. We got to a foundation that really works for us as a company and coheres with our mission, supports it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to hear your story there, especially. Well, I mean, first, everyone will relate to waiting in line for a lift and like being on a conference call, right? I mean,
Hopefully not the
entrepreneurs.
people screaming at each other though. That
Yeah,
was
yeah. Entrepreneurs do that. Not necessarily. Not necessarily a good idea, but we do that a lot. But what stuck out to me was you saying you were taking accountability for this. So something's happening. People inside your organization who are working for you are behaving a certain way that you feel, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this. This is not aligned with who I am. This is more importantly not who we want to be. And so then you're saying, where does the buck stop? The buck stops with me. So even if I'm a value skeptic, I'm certainly seeing a breakdown here. So let's figure out how to go solve that. So
well.
did you bring in people? Did you just do this all yourself? Like, how did you turn this back around?
Well, the first key was taking sort of the 6 or 8 of us who were really central to the company and been there for a while. And the exercise we went through, we just made up ourselves. We said, look, let's put a bunch of adjectives up on the wall. Let's brainstorm that might describe who we are or maybe want to be. Let's discuss them and let's pick the ones that would uniquely describe who we need to be to do what we're trying to do in the world. And then we can ask ourselves, are they descriptive or are they prescriptive? If they're descriptive, good for us. They're actually, they're relevant and they're true, right? If they describe they're prescriptive and we're not that yet, can we really become that? Are we committed to that? What would it take, in order to become that? And we've gone through that exercise a few times in our history. That first one, I think, came out with 3 values. Then we did it again and we got it up to I think 6 values. And then we added 2 more at an employee all hands kicking off the year, where we'd broken up into working groups to talk about what we'd regularly do is we'd say, okay, here are our values for each value. Let's actually check ourselves. Is this actually something that's needed to do what we're doing to accomplish our mission? And how are we doing? Do we actually live up to that? So we put ourselves to that test pretty regularly. And in that process, our employees identified 2 values that were missing. And I love that.
That's great. Yeah.
And we added them. We added 2 values there, I think probably 5 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago. It's pre-pandemic, so 6 years ago.
And one of the things I would love to learn about is how you keep yourself focused on big goals, right? So Groundfloor is doing big things out there. The theme for the Conscious Entrepreneur Summit this year is, as you know, is 10x thinking, right? So it's all about exponential thinking. One of the things that a lot of entrepreneurs face is we get stuck in the weeds of like, oh, I need to make this thing 10% better. Or I need to double my profit, or it's kind of incremental thinking. And if we want to make a big impact, we've got to have big goals, big ambitions, and then figure out what are we going to start doing, stop doing, or never do in order to really get there. I'd love to hear what's your philosophy around continually setting big milestones, because Groundfloor has been a success, right? Like yes, it took a long time to launch, and right, you've got a lot of wind at your back, and a lot of things are happening. How do you keep ratcheting up the scale of the ambition, the bigger goals? How do you build that into the company?
Well, I think it starts with why we're here. I needed a why that was big enough to match the price that I was paying to do it. The biggest price we're paying is opportunity cost. And in the early going of any venture, the only true enterprise value is the value that comes from being fully committed to it. And so the big moment for us was when Nick and I both said, okay, we're in. Getting to know each other 3 months. It's hard as an entrepreneur. We're going to put aside our other projects. We're going to focus in on this. And we can have a checkpoint in the future where we're going to ask ourselves whether it still makes sense to do that. Mm-hmm. But that created enterprise value, even though we didn't know what we were doing or how we were doing it or whether we could even do it, whether it was even feasible. But that commitment. And I think for me, I was married and divorced in 2010. My first wife was profoundly uncomfortable with my entrepreneurial ambitions. Mm-hmm. We had a tension between us about that throughout our marriage. And I'm not going to say I got divorced so that I could go start a company, but because that's certainly not true. But being divorced actually freed me up to be able to do that. And I felt some weight about that. I said, okay, well, I just went through this breakup of a marriage, and it's impacting my kid, and it's my son, and it's impacting me, and it's impacting her, and a lot of other people. If I'm going to start a company, it needs to be something that's going to matter in the world, and it's going to be motivating to me. And what's motivating to me as an entrepreneur is to do something that's truly mass market. Like at Republic Wireless, I thought about myself as much as anything as a community organizer. You know, like we really, I want to mobilize technology. I've always wanted to mobilize internet technology to do something big on a grand scale. And I'd rather fail for trying to do something too big than succeed and feel like I aimed too low. I really felt like it was going to cost me a lot no matter what, in terms of heart, just who I am and what motivates me and how I work. I know myself well enough. I couldn't play small. I had to go for the big idea. So it started there. And I think in the company, the tension has been, as far as we've come, several $100 million of assets under management, we've sold probably $2 billion now of securities to retail investors over the years. Like, the numbers have started to get to a size that we're proud of our numbers now. We don't, we feel like we've achieved something. As much as that's true, it's still so small relative to the total opportunity. I mean, I think of us as very similar to the discount brokerage business. And Charles Schwab started that in 1974. And in 1984, somewhere around there, he broke free of the Bank of America merger and had his company back. And he was still really small. And Charles Schwab didn't become the Charles Schwab that we think of until the 90s, the 2000s. Mm-hmm. And that's how long it takes to build a generational company in an area like finance or something big like that. And I think that's what I was after. I wanted to be on that kind of arc. It's not for everybody, I know that, but it was.
I mean, look, not all entrepreneurs want to scale. They're not all ready to scale. They don't even all have the resources to do it or the mindset to do it, right? And that's kind of what we try to get at here is, what is the mindset there? And so you're saying you got to tap into something that is a personal value. So your company's ambition has got to align with your personal value. You talked about being a community organizer or really like getting the technology to rally around something big and meaningful and interesting. And when you do that, you've got a flywheel and it can work. But not everybody's wired that way, or not everybody does that alignment thing, right? So one of the challenges I've had before is like, sure, I can put a lot of time and energy into something, but if I don't feel it, right, then I'm like, why bother, right? And I think the opportunity cost is the most important and least understood thing of being an entrepreneur. Is I used to get stuck, or not used to, I have gotten stuck with like the sunk cost fallacy. I'm like, well, I've been doing this already, so let me just continue. Let me just keep going. And all I need is one more X, right? Like customer, one more year, one more feature, one more whatever. Versus, hey, if I was starting today and I had $1 in 1 hour, would I do this? Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's kind of zero-based budgeting for your life and your career time. Mm-hmm. I think it's a tension because you want to have commitment. You want to persist. And in order to achieve anything great, you have to be committed and you do need to persist. At the same time, we also have to be honest with ourselves about whether this still aligns with what we're here to do. I believe we are all built to do something unique and special in our lives. And there's a journey that we all should go through in order to connect with that, whether it's through faith or prayer, or whether it's through meditation, or whether it's through what people have a lot of different ways that they do it. Whatever it is, I think it's important to connect with that and stay centered on that and stay in communion with that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's kept me going. I get the question a lot. I'm like, God, you're 12 years in. Are you tired? Of course I'm tired. That's what vacations are for. That's why you hire a good team so that you don't have to carry it all yourself. And but I'm also energized. I'm energized by what we're building, and I'm grateful more than anything for the opportunity to build it, that we're still here, that we're still slugging away, that we're still, building. We can provide great careers for people now in the company. We got 105 employees, and we have people that are building their careers here and doing great things for their families and for themselves. We are doing great things for customers, right, across our company that really matter to them. And I'm humbled and hugely motivated by that to this day.
What are the stories that you've heard about, as a mission-driven company? What are the stories you've heard about the impact that you're having for people, like on customers?
Well, look, we provide capital to people who are fixing and flipping or building single-family houses. I love what that is in the world, right? Think about that. That is providing capital for somebody to do that for a living. These are people they're not doing it as like some house flipping show, in order to make a quick buck. This is how they're feeding their family. This is how they're building wealth and providing for their families, right? This is their business. And so it's an honor to get to be partnered with them to do that. And equally, they're solving important problems in rehabilitating our aging housing stock across the country and solving our affordability problem, right? If there are a lot of ways to solve the affordability problem, one of them is to build more houses and build more houses that people want where they want them, and to do it in a way that more people can afford it as a first-time home purchase. So I love that. I mean, that's the part of we're not building McMansions, in exurbs somewhere. We're typically building in transitioning neighborhoods, and we're making it possible for these neighborhoods to grow in a way that isn't bulldozing them with Wall Street money, right? These are indie developers. I love that, and on the other side, we have a whole cross section of people aged 20 to 60, or 70, who are looking for an investment that they can trust. And they've taken the leap to solve what I lovingly call the Groucho Marx problem, which is I probably shouldn't invest in any investment that would have me. If it's being offered to me, it's probably a scam. They have managed to get over that and opt out of public markets, and they found their way to a really good financial product. We're proud of the financial product. We know it's good for people. And I love seeing the impact of that, because self-directed investors built Charles Schwab, right? That's how that business got built. Self-directed investors are building Groundfloor, and they're putting their faith and trust in us, and it's getting a return to them, not only financially, but it's also proving to them that they can be successful financially in financial markets. They can be financially literate. They can be successful at investing. They're not the sucker at the poker table. And I love that, because I think that kind of faith and trust and risk-taking should be rewarded. And so many times with, REITs or traditional financial products or banks, people are being taken advantage of. They know it, and they don't know how to opt out of it, and they're scared to opt out. So I think it's having an impact on psychology broadly based, right? Not just Groundfloor. We're part of a broader trend, but I love being part of that, because I think it's going to have a renewing impact on people's financial lives.
Wow. Nice. Yeah. Awesome. Tell us about your habits, inspiration, routines, the books that you've drawn inspiration from, the things that you do to, make sure that you're staying level as you're going through this tornado of building the company.
Well, I am indebted to a lot of people who do a lot of great thinking. And, for example, one book that I like to recommend to entrepreneurs is The Courage to be Disliked. It's a great book.
Great book.
There's a follow-up now, which is, The Courage to be Happy.
I have those. Yeah, I got those both. Those are great ones.
Books.
Yeah.
Adlerian psychology, I think, has a lot to offer us as entrepreneurs. I had not intersected with it before, and I find every time I touch that body of work, I'm reminded of how generative it is for me as an entrepreneur. Really, it's a piece of work that when I read it, I think, yeah, that's.
So what'd you like so much about those books?
Well, I particularly appreciate the sense that we choose sort of who we are and who we become. And I think that's easy to say, well, I choose to be an entrepreneur. What's harder is to say, I choose to be an entrepreneur who has the kind of company where people are screaming at each other. And I want to own that. And I want to do something about it. And I can create, because I created that and I had the agency to create that, I'm not going to be victimized by it. I'm now going to go choose to create something else.
To me, one of the things I remember taking away from that was just the idea that we all have choice. Like even when you don't feel like you do, you can make a choice. So something happens, you have a choice on how to react.
I don't know if you've intersected with conscious leadership group thinking and sort of that. I think that's loosely coupled with this. And I think for me, the idea of being below the line versus above the line and understanding the drama triangle, I think about that a lot. I've benefited from a coach who is deeply thoughtful about applying that body of work. And I think a lot about, where am I on the drama triangle right now? We all fall below the line, day to day, within the day. And I think the struggle is, how do you stop, in particular with Courage to Be Disliked, it's kind of like, how do you avoid sort of being a victim and choose instead to be a creator and see what your role, to your point, see what your role in creating your situation is. And I think that's where you find the path out, right? You find the path out. And I have, I've read a lot. I'm constantly reading a lot, books like that. Anything on sort of psychology, spirituality, I'm paying attention to. Meditation practice has really benefited me, mindfulness in particular. I really like the Waking Up app. I spend a lot of time there with Sam Harris. Love his voice. I think having a coach has been really helpful to me, who knows my team actually, and has worked with many of my team members and can, sort of intervene. Those are some of the tools. I also am very avid at trying to stay physically fit and spending the time to do that, making the time to do that. I think strength training, I love hiking. I love being out in Colorado in the summers. We were talking about before recording. I spend a lot of time on trails and out in nature. I think I try to eat well as best I can, but trying to keep myself physically fit, spiritually fit, mentally fit. I think those are some of the things I do.
Fantastic. Well, hey, this is a great primer, I think, for any ambitious entrepreneur who wants to go out there, take a big swing at the bat, have a big impact, and you're giving us a lot of really fantastic tools. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.